Welcome to the Dream Journal. From the studios of KSQD in Santa Cruz, the Dream Journal is a weekly show where we explore the power of nighttime dreams through conversations with dream experts and with listeners like you. A dream can be meaningful even if you don't know what it means. And today's music, created fresh this morning, is called The Forever Bridge. What kind of dream adventure do you want? Our People of the Dream guests, Bill St. Cyr and Sue Scavo, will talk about how you can have a conversation with your dreams instead of trying to figure them out. I am your host, Catherine Bell of Experiential Dreamwork, and welcome to the Dream Journal. I want to let you know that registration for the IASD conference is now open. Keynotes include lucid dreaming expert Charlie Morley, precognitive dream scientist Dr. Julia Mossbridge, and Jungian analyst Dr. Fanny Brewster. It's June 21 to 25, 5 days of presentations, plus networking receptions, a side contest, and a fabulous dream ball. It's all online, so no flights, just insights. Attend in your pajamas. Registration is open now at asdreams.org. I will also be teaching about my treasure hunt approach to Dreamwork through a lecture as well as in a 4-session experiential morning dream group, and so I hope to see you there. Okay, on to our guests, Sue Scavo and Bill St. Cyr. Sue Scavo and Bill St. Cyr are some of my early introduction to really intensive dream work. I had been in dream groups for many years and got a lot of benefit out of them, but this one-on-one dream kind of coaching, or I don't know if you call it therapy, but like this guiding, this kind of following of the journey is something that I learned about early on with these my dear mentors of People of the Dream. Used to be students of the Dream, but now you're People of the Dream. And you can find what's that?
We had a dream about People of the Dream.
Oh, perfect. We had a dream. And you can find them at their webpage, peopleofthedream.com, and also at People of the Dream on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Is there anywhere else, or that's the basics there?
I think that's the basics.
Okay. Excellent. So glad to have you guys on the show. You've both been on the show separately and together over the years, but it has been quite a while, probably a year and a half for either of you, maybe 2 years. So I'm just really glad to be chatting with you guys. So why don't you introduce yourself? Maybe you could just to describe a little bit about your own interest in dreams and how that started. Maybe let's start with Sue.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Sue.
It's nice to hear your voice. Well, I've been a dream worker for about 27 years, 6 years. I don't know, something like over 25 years. I'll say that. I came to dreams because I'm a writer, I'm a poet, and the way that poetry works within me is the same kind of energy that dreaming is. Mm-hmm. So I was drawn in how dreams, for me, poetry uses image and story the same way dreams use image and story. And both are very experiential. So I was very curious about dreams through my love of poetry. And that's kind of how I came into dreaming.
Mm-hmm. There's something about that there's a real metaphors, and they both speak in metaphors and like multi-layered metaphors, both dreams and poems. And sometimes when I'm talking about poems, I get mixed up and call them dreams, and vice versa too. So there's something about that I think is really powerful.
Totally. I do that all the time with my clients. I'm like, so tell me the poem again. Tell me the dream again. All the time. Yeah, when I'm teaching writing, because I also teach writing sometimes. I'll do this, I'll do it the other way around, just because they do, for me, they do exist. And, for me, in that same kind of energetic way where they open doors, metaphors, the word metaphor means to like, move across. And so like, I think dreams and poetry do that. They move across.
I never knew that. Move across, huh?
So that's me.
Okay.
I'm also a writer. I have a book of poetry out that came out a couple of years ago that's very dream based. And I'm currently working on a book about dream work, trying to describe what we do.
It's hard to describe, isn't it?
I know, right? It's so hard.
I'm in the same boat. Exactly. Great. Well, I'm excited.
I want to talk about why it's hard, but I'll let Bill introduce himself.
Okay. Sure. Of course. Bill St. Cyr. Welcome.
Hi, Catherine. Good to be here.
Yeah.
I sometimes joke that my background is plumbing.
Well, it kind of is.
I was a plumber for 20 years before I started doing Dreamwork, but I think really my search began, is really kind of a personal search just for the truth. And I did a lot of social justice work. I had a sibling, my older brother, who died when I was younger, and it kind of began a lifelong search for really the meaning of life, how to deal with grief, how to deal with loss, how to deal with my anger about that loss. And after a decade and a half or so social justice work, I was kind of burnt out, looking for something deeper, and dreams opened me to a more personal path to experiencing what felt like what was true for me in my life and finding meaning. So that's kind of how I ended up in the dream world.
Okay. So wonderful. So we wanted to kind of talk a little bit about like what does that mean to be in conversation with a dream versus figuring them out? Like why don't you guys say a little bit more, and I guess I'll let you who wants to start.
Okay. I mean, I think to me, because I really feel like it is a conversation, like when I've talked to people for the first time about what we do or what I do, I'm always like, I don't even know how to explain it.
Right.
Because it's very different. Because I think the heart of it is about being in conversation, and conversation has the assumption that there is something to be in conversation with. So, there's some energy in the dream to me that is very, mysterious. I don't know where it comes from. Is it parts of ourselves? Are there guides coming to us from, sacred places? All those are probably true and all have, it's all mixed together. But for me, I just work with like the fact that it is a conversation. And so, the dreams to me like offer one side of the conversation, and then we respond by opening the doors, opening the metaphors, being with the feelings and the experiences of the dream. And then we respond in that way. And when we open a dream that way and work with it, then our next dream responds to how we've been working with it. And so to me, it is about conversation, and it is about relationship. As Bill and I were joking around about how like dreams can be like choose your own adventure, because in a way they absolutely are. Because it's not like, to me, like some people are like, dreams will show you who you really are, and dreams will show you your like whatever. To me, I'm like, I think dreams just want to be in a relationship with us so that we can choose our adventure. So we can choose like parts of ourselves that we want to explore or not explore. If that makes sense. Like, when I think about myself, I think like there's a million things I could have done in this world. I could have been a teacher. I thought about becoming a professor, like a poetry professor. And I have my MFA, that was a road I thought about. I thought about many, many, many different things, but like, there was something about I think the dreams helped me choose what I wanted, not like what maybe the world thought I would be best at, or other people, or even what I thought I should do. But it's about like learning to make choices. I think that, dreams work a lot and work very deeply with trauma. And one of the things that happens with trauma is that we have our choices taken away, and we kind of lose faith in ourselves. We stop trusting ourselves because of what's happened to us. And I think dreams work to restore that and for us to discover that so that we can actually make choices. So, I think, so then the dreams are in relationship with us in that way, walking with us instead of like saying you have to go this way or you should be doing this or whatever. It's more like, well, how's this feel? And this is what's blocking you. And have you thought about this? And, so to me, that's what being in conversation means.
Okay. Yeah. So, I'd love to hear some examples. Like, I don't know if you want to give an example, Sue, or if Bill has one that he wants to share. I'd like to hear like this whole idea of a conversation where we have a dream and then we talk about the dream and then the dream responds. This is something that I'm always fascinated with.
I mean, I haven't exactly. Start with my own idea of what it means to be in conversation.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Bill.
And I do have a dream in mind. I just don't know, like, the follow-up dream. I mean, it's interesting because I think they're all connected, sometimes in ways that are very unexpected. But I just want to start with, like, the thing that Sue said about trauma and how what happens in our culture, because we live in a relatively dissociated culture, is we experience everything in a non-relational, non-conversational way. We look at our dreams and we think of it as an object. We think of it as something to figure out, like, or to understand or to interpret or to analyze, as opposed to, and I think a lot of the language for me came out of my understanding and study of trauma and abuse, that, like, actually reality and experience itself is more relational, more conversational. So when I'm with a dream, like I can use a dream as an example where I was actually in this battle. There were like 5 or 6 of us, and then there were like, I think 5 or 6 to a dozen maybe that we were fighting against. And you know, when I had the dream, I'm not a person who uses guns. I'm a very conflict averse person. So I wake up from a dream like that, and it's a very bizarre experience for a lot of us, probably, because it's like you immediately go into like, well, what was that? Right. What was that thing? Again, you immediately go into kind of objectified idea. And it's a practice to be like, okay, take a breath. What is it actually? So for me, being in conversation with it means partly just being in relationship to the experience. So outside of the dream, I immediately have all these judgments about guns, about violence, about conflict, about myself. But that's not really what's happening in the dream. What's happening in the dream for me energetically, when I feel into it, so in a way is more experiential than conversational in regards to this dream. I just feel into that energy and I'm like, wow, that's a good energy. You know, I haven't been sleeping well. I'm getting older. Like, I don't often feel that kind of healthy, you know, and I also just like, I felt really kind of heartbroken around a lot of what's happening since Trump got elected. And so to feel the energy of the dream, to feel that, like, what felt very much in kind of going back into it, a very healthy kind of energy, it kind of woke something up in me. One, I'm not alone. I've got people at my back. I'm at other people's back. I'm not giving up. I'm in the fight. And it's just like this, it's actually a kind of sweet, very grounded energy so then part of the conversation for me is I'm just in my day-to-day life. Like, how do I be in that energy in my day-to-day life? Mm-hmm. Not literally like fighting, but how do I bring that healthy libido, if you will, life energy, spark, passion to my day-to-day life? And so in a way it becomes a conversation, not just with the follow-up dreams, but also with my day-to-day life and what, you know, even getting ready for the show today. Part of me is like nervous. I'm dealing with the technology and part of me can just start to cave. Like, it's just a part of me that can get kind of overwhelmed by it all. And it's a practice to take a breath and be like, okay, touch into that energy, touch into that practice and be in your life in a way, in a 24/7 conversation with the consciousness that comes to me in my dreams.
So, like, and to me, like, I love that you said that the conversation, it's often not words. Sometimes it's words, but I think it is how we feel. Like, I think the dreams, you know, and wherever they come from, our unconscious, you know, the whatever realm. I do think part of the conversation is experiential, like is to be like, remember that feeling or feel that feeling? That's part of who you are.
Yeah.
And how do you want to be with that? How, and offering like space to learn how to be with that feeling, whether it's new or it's something that we've lost. So, I think that is part. I think being in our feelings and our experience is part that, to me, that's a huge part of the conversation.
Right. Well, I'm really struck by this whole, the conversation about the conversation, and that this particular dream that Bill is sharing is, one that many people would consider a nightmare. And yet there's a lot of really helpful energy you're getting from this, from the sense of, of not giving up, of not being overwhelmed, of having this strength and having people to help, having people at your back. And so this is like kind of part of what, I heard Sue talking about, saying that Dreamwork is kind of a choose your adventure journey, or like, I don't want to hear more about this idea. Like if I'm someone, and I actually am someone that has a lot of nightmares, and they come and go. Sometimes they're worse than others, but a lot of people don't want to look at their dreams because they're all really difficult. And yet I still get a choice. I still get to choose how to look at that dream. And this morning I woke up with driving off the edge of a cliff into the redwood forest, and on a road I drive all the time, and I hope I don't go off the edge of a cliff for sure. And yet there's something about it, like I didn't get badly hurt, but I kind of got up, and there's a lot more to that dream, but there's some way that maybe that was helping me in a way, like letting go of my preconceived notions. And is there a way that we can start to look at even really difficult dreams that you might call nightmares as helping us and actually providing something valuable to ourselves?
Absolutely. I think that is part of the conversation. I think dreams are unflinching around what we carry inside of us and what we're experiencing in the world, not just what we've experienced in the past, but what we're experiencing now. And so, and they want to work with us, because I always say that dreams are timely and time sensitive, but they're also timeless. And so, to me, like, they're working in this way to bring up what we're dealing with. And a lot of what we're dealing with is really difficult. And we've had really, scary, most of us have had really scary experiences. Most of us have experienced, trauma at a high level, or trauma that doesn't seem like a high level, but then later we find out it is,
right.
Long-term trauma. Like, I think we all have that. And just being in this world, it's a difficult world, and it's very unbalanced. And so, I do think the dreams bring the things that have happened to us. So one kind of scary dream is like just showing us what's happened to us. And sometimes sometimes we need to see it in really acute detail. Sometimes it's not literal. It's more like a metaphor for what's happened to us. And then sometimes we have dreams that are scary that are actually, upon like waking and working with, like Bill's dream is like, it's scary, but it's also like an invitation, and there's power. There's some kind of taking back power.
Right.
And we do get to choose. Like, if we choose, decide, it's like, some people like will tell me later, well, I had this dream years ago, but I was afraid to tell you, or I didn't want to work it. I'm like, that's great. Because again, for me as a dream worker, it's your conversation with the dreams. It's like the dreamer's conversation with the dreams, not my conversation with their dreams. Like, if I have a dream and I'm like, I can't handle it, I don't want to do this right now, the dreams will be like, either, okay, we'll just go over here then,
right. Or
they might bring another dream and say like, okay, but this is where you're stuck. And maybe we can look at it this way. So just like, so it is like, again, I think there is this conversation, like, to be like, I don't, that's why when I do a session with people, I'm always like, where do you want to start?
Right.
What's the dream that's calling to you? And if they say like, I know this dream is important, but it's really scary, I'm like, okay, well, let's just put it on the side and just acknowledge that it's there. And where else do you want to start? Because again, it's their journey, not mine. And I've done that with my own work where like, I'll do a session with my person and we'll work a dream. I'll be like, I don't want to do that. And then I totally forget the homework. I totally forget my work. 2 weeks later, I'm like, what was I supposed to be doing? Oh, I forgot. And that's part of the conversation too. Like, we forget, but that's just, to me, that's just all information. It's not good, bad, right or wrong. It's just like, it's part of the conversation. It's part of being human. And I think, And I do think that dreams are very fluid in that way. And that's what I mean by it. Then it becomes choose your own adventure. Like if you feel like I don't have maybe the support I need to go in the direction the dream is gesturing, because I think every dream is a gesture, then the dreams will be like, okay, how about this way then? Or what about this? Or have you thought about this? Or maybe they'll circle around and give us some supportive dreams so that we can look at the hard stuff. But yeah, I do believe that every dream is helpful. Even the really, I've also, like you, have had a lot of really terrifying dreams, and in the end, they've all been really, really important. Actually, really, very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even there's no such thing as a mundane dream in my view.
Right. Like I just had this dream. I was just driving. I'm like, okay, let's go, because because people because sometimes I have people I've worked with for a long time now, and sometimes when a dream is a very quiet dream, or just like I went to work, I went and got a coffee, like the context of that dream and the person's journey is really profound. Like to have a quiet dream of just going to get a cup of coffee at a coffee shop, what if the person hasn't been able to go outside of their house for 2 years, or what if they had a stutter, it could be, it can actually be even more profound than what we think of as profound dreams, or what some people would label as big dreams, which I don't believe there are big dreams or little dreams. So totally, I agree with you.
Yeah, I think another caveat in relationship to nightmares is sometimes the conversation can be as simple as acknowledging that there's some trauma there. Like, that would have been a nightmare for me if the feelings in the dream had been overwhelming.
I see.
So part of the practice for me is like, well, despite the judgments I have about that kind of a dream, what was the actual experience in the dream? And if it had been different and I had felt overwhelmed by the feelings in the dream, the conversation might have been really different. It might have been just like, literally just an acknowledgement of like, oh, well, what is that overwhelm for me? Is that about something that's happening now in my life? And even if it is that rooted in something for me from the past? And how do I get the support to then be in conversation with whatever that energy is for me? So it's still a conversation, just becomes a different kind of conversation. We used to have a tendency in the old days to always kind of like go into the experience of the dream, and I think a lot of times that doesn't really work. Like sometimes this is what Sue's saying, like you get to choose. And when it's something overwhelming, generally we are smart enough to know that like we don't want to go back into overwhelming experiences, but that doesn't mean we can't be in conversation with it. It doesn't mean we can't be like, okay, wow, my dream's telling me something about something that's happening for me or something that's coming up for me. And what do I do with that conversation? How do I acknowledge that and bring even just like a kind of tenderness into my day-to-day life in that case of like, how do I be with, okay, there's some energy coming up for me that's overwhelming, and how do I be tender with that consciousness?
Right. Yeah, I had a really, really hard dream probably maybe 15 years ago now about the trauma from my childhood. And it didn't help me to work it, but it helped me to know something. The dream was really, can I just say it real quick?
Yeah, sure. Please. That'd be great.
The dream was just, it was a longer dream, but like the core of the dream was that I was a little girl and I was watching my mother put poison into the dinner she was making for me and my brothers.
Ooh.
And a whole bunch of other things happened, but my mother didn't poison us, literally. My mom had a lot of trauma, but my mom did have a lot of trauma and she had a lot of fear. And, the best way for me to work with that dream was just to acknowledge that was true. Mm-hmm. That my mother's rage, because she was very angry, how she dealt with her trauma was to be very angry. That there was a kind of poisoning that happened. And the dream was just, I didn't need to go be the girl again and feel, I was just like, but to me it was, part of the conversation was to acknowledge what I kind of knew, but I was afraid to admit. It was like, that was my experience as a little girl, was that my mother's trauma that was unworked in her was like her putting poison in our food. Mm-hmm. And just knowing that helped me began to trust myself again, because it was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. Again, my mother never poisoned us,
right,
but
right.
like it is what it felt like. And so that changed my conversation even with myself about what happened as a girl. And it was a horrifying dream, and it was really helpful. And, I could also have, help me also have like tenderness toward my mom, who, also had a lot of trauma and didn't know how to get the help that she needed because, different generations. But, it was just such a, it was a terrible dream, and it was so helpful in the conversation for me in my, in my longer journey, because if I'm denying something I know because it can't be, because I'm afraid to admit it, and the dream says, no, that's true, then that changes my journey. That changes like who I am and how I trust myself and how I know myself.
And part of trusting ourselves, of course, is to say, I'm not ready to look at this dream yet. I mean, I have people who say I have very difficult nightmares, but I don't want to talk about them right now. And that's perfect. That's fine. I trust that. I trust the dreamer. And they have, well, what other dreams do you have? Let's look at some of these other dreams. And, as they start to develop a trust, then maybe they start to trust themselves and even the more difficult dreams. And,
right. And I think even just acknowledging that, yeah, you are having bad dreams. And, I'm always like, let's on the table that you've had really scary dreams. Well, so like just to acknowledge that it's there. Like, when someone says, oh, I've had this scary dream, I really don't even want to tell you. I'm like, okay, but let's just like, it's on the table. And let's look at these other dreams in relationship to the fact that you had a scary dream. You don't have to tell me the dream or anything, but, let's just acknowledge, that again, that acknowledgement is it's definitely part of the conversation. And then when you look at the other dreams, you're like, okay, well, let's look at these and know that they're in relationship to the dream that you're not ready for. And that also gives a lot of permission and for the dreamer to begin to trust themselves, to be like, okay, this is my journey. It's not my dream worker's journey. It's not like a journey that someone wrote about in a book. It's not like I don't have to follow like stages or steps or whatever. It's like, I get to choose today what I'm going to do today and how I'm going to be in my journey today.
Oh, love that. Thank you. Thank you, Sue. This is Sue Scavo and Bill St. Cyr of People of the Dream, and you are listening to The Dream Journal. We are on KSQD, and we're broadcast live from the studios in KSQD in Santa Cruz and co-broadcast live in San Jose by KCXU. And you can find out about Bill and Sue's work at peopleofthedream.com or at People of the Dream on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. They have a ton of great YouTube content lately and always very interesting things going on. So we're going to come back in just a few minutes and talk more about this idea of choose your own dream adventure. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Dream Journal, and I'm Catherine Bell of Experiential Dreamwork. I'd like to welcome all the streamers listening in all over the country and let you know that people all over the world are interested in their dreams. If you want to nudge the algorithm to help spread interest in dreaming, please follow The Dream Journal on your favorite podcast app. You can also give us a review, some stars. That's always helpful, helps spread that interest. You can go to Facebook and Instagram to find out about upcoming shows and pod drops by following hashtag The Dream Journal and at Experiential Dreamwork. But most importantly, please talk to your friends about the dreams. And if you would like to entree, you could talk about the podcast. But basically, the idea is to get people talking to each other about dreams, because there's something that's just uniquely human about dreams and sharing the dreams. So this is the mission of the journal. Also, please contact me if you'd like to be a guest on the show. You could talk about your new book or let folks know about your dream-related offerings or dream-related research. We do have the big International IASD conference in June, which you can find out about at asdreams.org. But also, please mark your calendar for a local in-person event at the beautiful Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. The Festival of Dreams is back. The dates are October 10th through 12th, and the webpage is festivalofdreams.net. Linda Mastrangelo and I are excited to welcome you back. So today we have two guests who are Sue Scavo and Bill St. Cyr from People of the Dream. And we've been talking about dreaming as a choose-your-own-dream adventure and just the metaphor of dreams and how we can be in conversation with our dreams rather than trying to figure them out. So, Bill and Sue, welcome back.
Thanks, Catherine.
All right. So we were talking about, one of the topics we were going to address that has to do with being on a journey, and how Dreamwork is a journey, and that it's not even about a destination. It's not like it's something we're ever done with, right? And so yet there is a sense of moving and traveling and going from one place to another. Well, maybe even just moving from birth all the way through our lives. So, how do you guys think about the journey metaphor? What was that? We heard the metaphor means moving across.
Yeah.
Yep.
That perfect works out for the idea of the journey, and that everyone's journey is different.
Yeah. Can I say something?
Yeah, Bill, please.
Yeah, I think that part of it's really a journey back to ourselves. So again, in that conversation about abuse and trauma, a lot of us lose parts of ourselves along the way. We learn to not, like you were talking about trust, Catherine.
Yeah.
Like a lot of us just don't learn not to trust ourselves, learn not to trust our feelings, learn not to trust our discernment, learn not to trust the way we look, learn not to trust our voice. And part of it's, I guess, two things. One is beginning to look at dreams in a different way. So instead of looking at dreams as just these isolated pieces of information, looking at them more also as a conversation over a lifetime.
Mm.
And looking at what can I learn? You mentioned that dream that I had about fighting and how that could have been a nightmare. Well, 15 years ago, it probably would have been a nightmare because I think I felt a lot less empowered in myself than I do today. I didn't really trust myself as a human. I didn't really trust myself as a man. I think there was a lot of violence in my upbringing. And so I learned to, for example, repress my anger. I learned to repress my sort of libido in terms of just kind of life energy. And so I think 15 years ago, I probably it would have been a nightmare because I would have actually probably been running or, there were many times as a kid, I had to run from being bullied or living in a neighborhood where there was a fair amount of violence and crime going on. And so there's this journey to on this very personal level to learn to trust. I think it's been a 15, 20 year journey to learn how to trust that kind of energy in myself as someone in a male body, for example. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's okay for me to be a big person and take up space. It's okay for me to have a voice. That doesn't mean I have to dominate other people. I can actually use that energy to both empower myself and people around me to find themselves in their own journey.
Mm-hmm. Right. To kind of trust that, yourself. And one of the things that comes up for me about that dream is that because my waking self has so many judgments about violence and guns and things like that sometimes it's hard for me to remember what it really felt like in the dream. I might wake up and go, oh, guns, no, don't like that. And so, so it can be really kind of a practice to write down immediately as soon as I wake up, what was the feeling in the dream? Because it seems obvious at the time, but then the next day or even 20 minutes later, it could seem very different. Have you had experiences like that, Bill?
Well, even having the conversation today, earlier you asked if there was a follow-up to that, did I have two dreams in conversation? And as we were talking, I remembered this other dream that I had. There were these two guys in the dream that were kids that I grew up with as a teenager. And they very much grew up in that time in life where before I became afraid of that kind of energy, they were guys that I hung out with that, I mean, we grew in very different ways and grew apart, but just like I think that dream being with these two guys, Billy and Pat were their names, teenage friends, kind of when I lived in the hood, really, very tough neighborhood. But they had my back. Like one of them, Pat Boylan, there was one time where I literally got knocked down by somebody and he was on top of me and Pat Boylan jumped on this guy's back. Oh. And he had my back, right. You know, and I don't think it's a coincidence that after kind of embracing the energy of that first dream, I then had a dream about these two guys from my teenage years that in a way had my back and were with me. And it was a time when I wasn't as scared of the violence in the world as I am nowadays. And that's not totally true. I wasn't maybe as scared of my own anger is a different way to say it, or my own power, if you will.
Right. And this conversation about trauma is always interesting to me because, I think, oh, well, I didn't really have too much traumatic things happening to me. And yet some things, I think even Sue was alluding to this earlier, that some things that were not maybe physically violent might have felt like being poisoned, like the dream she shared about her mom poisoning the food that they were eating. And thinking also just about the natural world, like we think, if humans are a certain way and humans are particularly violent in a way, and yet there's a lot of violence that happens in the natural world too. Think of all the animals that kill to survive. And then birds who lose babies, lose their eggs, and so there's a lot of trauma in the natural world as well. And of course humans are natural as well. So, but there's something that I think dreams maybe are evolutionarily designed to help us work through the things that do happen to us, whether it's kind of a human-made trauma or something that happens like in terms of an earthquake or something, that there's all kinds of ways that trauma affects our life. And dreams seem to be genius at helping us sort through that and restore the choices that we lose when we get into these traumatic situations.
Well, totally. I absolutely agree. I mean, I think, so I'm just going to go back to the dream I had about my mom. When I was a kid, my family looked great. People loved my mom. She was very, the other side of her, she was very passionate. She was funny. She was, she was a performer. She was a singer. I have some cousins who always were like, we wish we had your mom. She's so fun. And I was like, and that wasn't not true because she was sometimes. And then she had this other side that as she got older, it got worse. But, it didn't. So I think a lot of people are like, well, my life wasn't bad. I was fed and watered, I guess, and housed, whatever. But I think that so I think there is what is trauma? What was it, my mother never hit me. My mother never, physically did anything. But there were times when she was really horrible. And that is just as traumatic. And also in other times when she was very loving. So, that is trauma. I mean, yes, and there is trauma in the natural world. I mean, climate change is creating a lot more trauma, around the natural world. And I think, also culture is really, very, really traumatizing. Growing up as a woman in the Midwest, I was really taught not to have a voice. I was taught to be quiet. I was taught that it's not okay to speak, I needed to, defer to the men in the room always. Yep. So, I mean, I think walking as a woman through the world can be just traumatizing. Remember going to New York City in my 20s and it was so terrifying. People yelling at me, people doing sorts of, so I think, when we think about trauma, for people on the margins, it's very traumatizing. People in the queer community, people of color are dealing with trauma on a daily basis. just going to the grocery store. We were in Montreal recently, and we went into the store, and I walked in, and there was someone at the counter, and she said hi. And then this, young black man walked in behind me, and she walked around and followed him around.
Wow. And
I was like, there it is. Like, that kind of stuff happens every day. Mm-hmm. So we're not just dealing with like, oh, was I abused or whatever? I'm like, we're dealing with things like that. So it's like this everyday sort of like dealing with a culture also that does not want us to be in our power. Mm-hmm. Not really. Mm-hmm. So I think that is a trauma that we're all dealing with too.
Right. Yeah. And I appreciate Bill's talking about being in a male body and how that is also, traumatic in a way of how do I trust myself, or do I see people reacting me in a certain way because of my size, and, and then how do I trust my own instincts then? If people react to me like this.
Right.
Yeah, I think, a couple of things I would say is just one, like, that there's a difference between, so for example, like violence in nature or death, for example, like I had a brother that died when I was 17. That in and of itself, that's a traumatic event, right? But the reason that I carried PTSD around that was because as a culture, my family and the people in my community didn't know how to be with me around my grief. Mm-hmm. So if my family, and I'm not judging my family, they didn't know how to be with it either, right? No one taught my parents how to be with it. Everyone taught themselves how to survive and how to move on, not a healthy way of being with grief. So the dissociation or overwhelm or alienation that comes is really, I like what you and Sue were saying about the cultural piece, that there's really like, the culture doesn't meet us in a way. We're taught to just move on, for example, which at that point in my life, when my brother died, I don't know, for some reason I was like, I'm not moving on. I had so much anger. I guess it was related to the grief that I felt. And so for me, the PTSD, if you will, from that moment, part of it's obviously the traumatic event, but again, in a healthy culture, I would have been caught in the aftermath of that event. And so I would have been held, I would have moved through the grieving process, and I wouldn't have carried around trauma in the way that we're talking about it. Mm-hmm. So I think that dissociation, and this is where dreams can really help, because in a way they show us the way that we've learned to dissociate from parts of ourselves. So for years, I, walked around dissociated from myself because I didn't know what to do with all of my feelings about the loss of my brother. It basically took the world out, the ground out from underneath me. And I wandered around for years in a way, lost from myself. And in a way, it wasn't until I started working with dreams that I really began to find myself. Actually, that was probably 20 years later. It wasn't until almost 20 years later that I began to really see how that had affected me and how I had learned to cope in ways that really were a form of dissociation and alienation from who I really am.
Right. And, maybe that culture has never existed yet, or maybe, and yet I find that my dream people, my dreamies, my dream friends, dream colleagues, that there's some way that we're kind of trying to create a culture that allows for all of our feelings and gives support for even the grief and the fear. And like, is there something that we're creating here as a culture of dreamies, dream people of the dream?
People of the dream. There you go.
There you go, baby. I actually, I'm with you on that, because I think to me, like, a traumatic event does not have to translate into trauma. Like Bill was saying, like, if something happens and you're held in love and seen and, walk through it, then it's not trauma. It's a hard event, but trauma is natural. Like you were saying, like, we all have trauma, it could be from your brother died from cancer. Like right. It was not like he was hit by a car. Like, things happen. And, so it is about, like, being with that as part of being human. even like abuse, like if someone is like abused and they're heard and listened to, and something happens and justice happens, then they can move on. They're not like tainted for life. You know what I mean? They have this experience, but if they're held and someone, walks through it with them, then yeah, they're not traumatized by it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
I think
traumatic experience doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have PTSD or trauma. It's how do you respond to that traumatic experience? Your community, your dreams, how open you are to your feelings. Not everybody who lives through a war has PTSD, even horrible experiences. And I think dreams are really helping. There's some interesting research being done lately about how dreams help us recover after these really intense experiences. And you can start to predict very early on who is going to have PTSD and who is not based on the content of their dreams. So we know there's something really vital in the dreams that's helping us every day with all the little indignities of every day, the little traumas.
I mean, well, absolutely. Like, I think that like dreams, one of the things that they can do in the conversation is like give us a place to have experiences, like part of what happened for me, like in the dream with my mom where she was poisoning the food, I was like pre-verbal at the time in the dream. So I had no words. And so my journey has been around like, how do I find words? Like I didn't speak English until not that I've spoke a foreign language. I made up my own language when I was a kid because I didn't want to speak English. Mm-hmm. So, like I was like words and language, I went silent. I had my own language because I didn't want anyone to understand me because I didn't think anyone would, I think, when I was little. Mm-hmm. So, to me, like, I think that like, so my journey has been to find words. The fact that, I actually wrote a book of poetry and it came out was kind of in my personal journey was a huge thing for me because it helped me to help me like that process helped me to move through the silencing. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like finding your voice and having your voice being acknowledged, being heard. I mean, this is the thing, and the after effect or a traumatic effect when we're not held and aren't able to move through a trauma cycle, which is actually a healing cycle. Part of the problem is we use trauma, one word for something that means 6 different things. Like trauma actually physiologically is a cycle that we're meant to move through. So the overwhelming event happens and we basically dissociate from the pain or overwhelm in order to get back to our community, if you will, so that we can be held and then release the pain and fear and then come back into ourselves. So that's like the healthy cycle. So publishing a book, having a community like you're saying, Catherine, and it is part of why we chose the name People of the Dream, is because it really, in order to move through trauma, we do need each other. Mm-hmm. In a way, I would argue that in order to be with our dreams, we also need to be with each other. Like we need people. We can do a certain amount of work, and I really want to encourage people to work with their own dreams, but I also think we also need other people to help us. Like I go in a lot of times having worked with my dreams with my dream person, or even in the conversation today, and there's new insights. That's part of the conversation is with the dream and with each other. And I think breaking out of that isolation, whether it's you writing a book or actually just acknowledging the feeling in a dream or what we said earlier about saying, I don't want to work with that dream. Right. That's somebody actually saying, I have a right to make a choice here, whereas most of us in the traumatic moment or in a moment of abuse didn't have the choice. We were overwhelmed by either what was happening to us or the feelings that came up for us in relationship to that.
Right. And just to circle back to what I was saying, like, I think part of what dreams can do is they give us a place to practice. You were saying, like you were saying that that study you were talking about, that they could predict now who's going to have PTSD. I do think that like dreams give it, I've had a lot of dreams about like speaking in public or speaking or getting past my silent voice so that when in my waking that I could practice it in my dream so I could have it in my outer life too. So that, if I went, my first speaking gig, I was like terrified, but I had a lot of, dreams about speaking in public so that when I got there, I could just breathe into those moments where I had already done it. Maybe not in my waking life, but in my dreaming life I had. And that was really helpful.
That's still a rehearsal. You know, that still counts. That's part that a lot of
you know,
people,
and I had dreamt about writing a book. You know, many books actually. And I had a dream where this archetypal figure was like, you need to write this book. And I was like, damn it. I don't want to.
Such a confusing dream.
That was not a confusing dream. That was a direct
message. So you guys, thank you. This is great. This is really fabulous. And I want to just say again, this is Bill St. Cyr, S-T-Cyr, and Sue Scavo, S-C-A-V-O, at peopleofthedream.com. And, you know, I want to, is there anything else that you want to say about people get in touch with you? Are you doing your classes and things like that?
You know, I think we have a program that's evolving. So if people get in touch with us, I think we're going to set up a wait list. I think we're sort of in a new round of going out into the world. I think that's part of why you were like, you want to do this show?
Right. We started releasing
like
all these
there in the world again.
Suddenly, all these YouTube videos are coming out, and my dream people have been talking to me like, "Oh wow, Bill and Sue have a new video out." And then,
and Sue has a newsletter that people can subscribe to also.
Yeah, I have a newsletter. I've been writing it for 3 years, so that's out there too.
Excellent. Okay, well, I want to just say, can you each take a turn and say goodbye and maybe like 10 seconds, 15 seconds of encouragements. Bill, go.
I just, take the space to be with your dream and trust your own relationship and see what comes up in conversation.
Perfect. Thank you, Bill. Sue Scavo, so glad to have you on the show.
Well, first, thanks for having us on, Kevin. It's always great to talk with you. And I would encourage people to like trust the dreams because they're showing you how to find yourself in old ways and also in new ways. And even the scary ones are really important.
Thank you, Sue and Bill. This is so wonderful to have you on the show. Take care.
Thanks, Catherine.
All right, bye now. So thank you. Thanks for listening. The Dream Journal is produced at the studios of KSQD in Santa Cruz, and we are live every Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific at ksqd.org. The podcast is released on the Monday after the show, and it spreads interest in dreaming when you subscribe, rate, and review. I am Catherine Bell. You can find out about my dream coaching practice at experientialdreamwork.com. Email me at catherine@ksqd.org, KATHERINE. Follow Experiential Dreamwork and hashtag The Dream Journal on Facebook and Instagram to find out about upcoming shows. I'd like to thank Rick Kleffel, Suki Wessling, Tony Rissimano. Intro and outro pieces are both by Mood Science. And tomorrow morning when you wake up, take a minute to write down your dream and bring it to the next Dream Journal.
Had an old thought in the old town, waking up, feeling down, was what I learned in the old school, is there's no fool like an old fool. Make the most of the moments you've got.